Hi, it's Jill Schlesinger, host of the Better Off podcast. Today on the show, we've got CNBC's Scott Wapner, author of the recently released When the Wolves Bite.
These guys are insulting each other on live television with the traders on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, oohing and eyeing, and, I'm just trying to hold the whole thing together. And it was this incredible moment that sort of just unfolded on live TV.
Welcome to the Better Off podcast. We're sponsored by Betterment, the largest online financial advisor. Today, we have a great guest. His name is Scott Wapner. You may know him as the host of CNBC's The Halftime Report. Also, I know him because I knew that he presided over this crazy live television interview between two huge, iconic investors, Carl Icahn and Bill Ackman, who were fighting over this company called Herbalife. And Scott Wapner was the guy that was presiding over this interview when it just went nuts and both sides went crazy. And we're going to have a link to the actual interview that probably spurred Scott to write this book. It's a really interesting account of how activist investors Carl Icahn and Bill Ackman fought over this company, but also had this old grudge. And so it's very compelling. And of course, it is never just about money, but money has a lot to do with it. So stay tuned. You're in for a real treat. It's Scott Wapner, author of When the Wolves Bite, Two Billionaires, One Company, and an Epic Wall Street Battle.
You're listening to Better Off with Jill Schlesinger.
Scott Wapner, welcome to Better Off. Great to have you here.
It's so good to be here, Jill. Thank you.
It's always fun to see somebody who, in person, after you've watched them on television. And you work for CNBC. You're a financial geek, not unlike the person interviewing you right now. So we
The few and the proud.
Yes, exactly. Or as someone once said to me, your idea of a good time was going through thousands of pages of tax reform over a weekend, which is true. So we start the program with a very easy question. Best financial or career decision you've ever made?
Best career decision I ever made was not pursuing a career in sports like I thought I wanted and focusing on financial journalism.
Stand by. Let's talk about the sports for a second.
All right.
Which sport?
Any sport. I grew up thinking I was going to be the next Howard Cosell.
And what happened?
Funny thing happened on the way to Howard Cosell. I got a job my first job out of school was working for a financial show, a syndicated show. And one thing led to another, and I never looked back.
That's great. The book is called When the Wolves Bite, Two Billionaires, One Company, and an Epic Wall Street Battle. So this is kind of a fascinating investigation of a company called Herbalife and two different investors who had contrary views of that company. So give a little of the background of Herbalife and tell us why you ended up writing this book.
So Herbalife is a 30-year-old company founded out of Los Angeles, a nutrition company. They make shakes and teas, and they've more recently positioned themselves as a health company. But they've been around for 30 some odd years, founded by a somewhat flamboyant guy named Mark Hughes, who is since deceased. And no one had heard of Herbalife all that much until Bill Ackman stood on a stage in Manhattan in late 2012 and did his big presentation and publicly announced that he was short the company, meaning that he was betting that the stock was going to fall. And not just fall, he thought it was going to be a zero. He claimed the company was a pyramid scheme. The company was going to be put out of business by regulators, and he would cash in big time. What he didn't expect to happen was that another big investor named Carl Icahn would get involved on the other side because they had a decade-old festering disagreement that just stood there behind the scenes for literally 10 years. And when Ackman was on the stage in Manhattan saying that Herbalife was going to be shut down by regulators, Carl Icahn was literally taking the other side at the very same moment, buying the stock. So it became this epic battle between two billionaires, both very high profile, one old school, one new school.
Talk a little bit about Ackman's background, because Ackman is sort of you said the newer breed of this, what we call activist investor now. So talk a little bit about what his life was like, how he got to this place when he made this big contra bet.
So Ackman had been a well-known investor for a number of years. And out of Harvard Business School, he started a fund. It was called Gotham Partners with another classmate from HBS. And, they started out doing investing. He cut his teeth a little bit as an activist investor. And it was his really first foray into activist investing, where you're the guy who's trying to take control of a company or make a big play for it. And he was sort of a young neophyte guy bursting on the scene. But you knew that he was going to be somebody. He just had that thing about him.
Very good looking,
smart,
very brash,
very good
right?
looking, tall, gray, decades early. But he's like a dashing guy, smart as a whip. And, he starts out at Gotham and the firm falls on hard times and it goes out of business. He's forced to liquidate after a number of years. And as part of that liquidation is how Bill and Carl Icahn first crossed paths. And that's where everything sort of really festered underneath the surface because of a deal gone bad between the two that had really never been resolved by the two other than a judgment and a payment.
Right. And the judgment and the payment was in Ackman's favor. So it went against Carl Icahn. And it was you'll read the book. It is amazing. When the Wolves Bite, we'll link to it. The thing that became interesting to me is that this idea of activism, give us the upside, give us a good activist investor, tell us why we should like that in the world of investing.
There are many instances where activist investors, whether it's Ackman himself or Carl Icahn or Dan Loeb, another popular name, actually go into a company and try and make things better. And probably more times than not, it actually works. The company becomes staid and stagnant, and you've got a country club atmosphere where the CEO is running off and playing golf and doing all sorts of stuff. And there needs to be some level of accountability. And it has been proven to work where you can increase productivity, the company can be better performing, the stock price can go up, which obviously benefits all of the employees, whether it's through their retirement plans or what have you. So they can have a very positive impact. But lost in the shuffle of the whole thing is really what happens to the employees and the business itself when it's quote unquote under attack. The tens of millions of dollars it costs to defend itself, what it does to morale inside the company, what it does to a town where a business is located, all of the employees, and then all the ancillary issues that are all around that. I tried to take a little bit of a stab at that, though not a truly deep dive into those issues, to try and give people an idea of what activists do, what they try to do, and maybe when it falls a little bit short.
In your mind, when you look at Ackman's role in the Herbalife story, someone comes to him and says, hey, we think this thing is like filled with shenanigans, that it's a pyramidal marketing scheme. The people are just buying the stuff. They're and essentially saying they're lying about how much product is being purchased by the folks who have brought into this organization versus sold in sort of the outside of that network. What is your view on the Herbalife story itself? Was Ackman right and his timing was wrong? Like, how do you view this?
So I think and I think it's fair to judge Herbalife sort of pre and post Michael Johnson, who's the CEO who's now recently left the business. I don't think the Herbalife today is the Herbalife of what it was years ago. And I know that Michael Johnson has tried to clean up the business a bit so that it's not entirely based on recruiting. Ackman's, or at least a principal part of Ackman's whole claim, which, as you say, was brought to him by a researcher who came up with a 100-page report that was really damning about Herbalife. Herbalife has had issues in the past and some high-profile ones. Things haven't always looked pretty. Mm-hmm. You've had these distributors that I write about in the book who would produce these videos and these testimonials of oh, if you sell Herbalife products, it's the greatest thing that's ever happened in my life. I went from making, $10 a week to $10,000. And hey, look at my mansion and my Ferrari and my Lamborghini and my private jet and all this stuff. And that's the side of Herbalife that Michael Johnson tried to clean up when he came into the business some 14 or 15 years ago from Disney. So, here you have a representative from the most wholesome of corporate entities coming into one of the most controversial in a business itself, multi-level marketing, that has always sort of skated around the gray areas of legitimacy in some minds. Some businesses have been shut down over the years. Others have remained certainly, fodder for critics who don't like the structure of these businesses.
And they tend to be predatory usually towards lower income folks. And in this case, with Herbalife, seem to be targeting the Hispanic or Latino market to get in there. Is that right?
Well, I don't know about they tend to, but there have been cases in the past where they have been deemed to be that. I don't think all multi-level marketing companies are bad. There's many names that we all know of that have existed for a long time and haven't had their legitimacy questioned. Mm-hmm. But this is a different case because of, as Ackman sort of brought to light, his claim was that Herbalife was taking advantage of undocumented immigrants who were just trying to find a better way in life and make some extra money, and who were being preyed upon by this company and their recruiters, who were saying, okay, here's a great business opportunity, buy all of this product for thousands, spend thousands of dollars to make tens of thousands of dollars. And what some of these folks found is that they spent that money and they didn't make the $10,000. In fact, they lost a lot of the money that they had put into the business. But again, the story itself, at least in Ackman's mind, that became the crux of the whole argument, that this is a predatory company preying on the least fortunate, and also the undocumented angle of it too, so that these people who were getting taken advantage of weren't going to come out of the shadows because they were so afraid of what would happen to them, so they would just lose and then be silent.
2012, Ackman gives this big speech, and then we start hearing about that Icahn is establishing a position supporting Herbalife, going long. And Carl Icahn is known out of the 80s. Like, I was growing up on Wall Street, and Carl Icahn was one of the, corporate raiders and sort of iconic and tough-ass dude from the boroughs.
One of the toughest.
Right?
Reputation among the toughest ever. And that's why the chapter about him I do call the Icahn, Icon. Because he truly is on Wall Street. You're talking about a guy who's been on Wall Street for the better part of 50, 60 years, and who really has managed somehow, it's really his genius, to reinvent himself over the decades to still remain relevant, where many of his compatriots of that time are long gone, off doing something else. But he has managed to remain relevant for longer than anybody that I can imagine.
Okay, so he has this beef with Ackman, which he ends up losing in the court. Basically, both of them are like, you screwed me, no, you screwed me. That's really like billionaires saying, you screwed me.
Right.
So none of us regular people really necessarily care about that. But Icahn really feels wronged in that judgment, correct?
At the end of the day, this is a story about power, money, greed, and revenge. And that brings us to your question. It's not only that Carl felt wronged by the decision, it was also the fact that Bill gloated about it after the fact in the paper, which sort of broke a code, at least in Icahn's mind. Business was done differently 50 years ago than it is today. If we win some, you lose some, but be humble if you win, because you're not always going to win. But don't go and brag about it. So at least in Icahn's mind, from that day forward, he said, look, if there ever comes a chance to get this guy back, this is him speaking to his coworkers, the guys he worked closely with, let me know. If there's ever a chance, if something comes around that you find, give me a heads up. Now, Herbalife happens, and Carl's people are watching Bill on the stage taking Herbalife out to the woodshed, and they come to him, and the stock had been knocked down in half, just about. And they said, okay, here's a great opportunity to make some money, but the cherry on top of the sundae is Bill Ackman's behind. So they did it. Now, if it was just Bill Ackman there and the stock had not been hammered and they didn't see an opportunity to make a lot of money, I don't think Carl would have done it. He's not that kind of investor. And that's what I think is important to recognize, that at the end of the day, Carl Icahn is about making money, making a good investment, not just getting revenge on somebody. But if he can do it at the same time, and he's said it throughout the last handful of years, that it is the cherry on top of the sundae.
What's the original sin for Bill Ackman once the Carl Icahn position becomes known? What do you think is where he really let this thing get away from him?
Not getting out immediately. The goalposts moved the minute that Carl Icahn showed up. The game changed. And I think instead of realizing that the game had changed and that the rules were going to be a whole lot different and it was going to be much more difficult to win, if not impossible, Bill doubled down. And I think he let his own hubris and bravado convince him that he was right and that he was going to win and prove to everybody, including Carl, that he was smarter and that he could beat him. And he probably should have covered his short at that moment.
Right, because he was in the money, right?
And gotten out.
So before he knew that Icahn was involved, he had made money. He shorted the stock. It goes down. Would have been a good trade.
Right.
Then he finds out that Icahn comes in. The stock goes up a bit, but he's still in the money after that point, I think.
Well, what happened before Carl got in, which in a sense also changed the game and let everyone know that this was different and that we hadn't seen anything like this before, was when Dan Loeb got involved. Now, Loeb is of the same, generational age as Ackman. Another sort of smart and handsome guy who gets a lot of press, and for good reasons. His performance has been fantastic. He runs Third Point LLC. He emerges, and he and Ackman had been friends in the past, and pretty good friends at that, at least at one time. And he comes out of the blue with a big position, long Herbalife, so he was in favor of Herbalife. And that really shook Ackman. So that was the first step where Bill maybe should have gotten a whiff, as though, maybe being so public on this investment, standing up there on the stage, calling a company a fraud for the whole world to see and sticking out your chest may not have been the best idea. And then when Carl emerged, it was, all bets are off.
Okay, so let's get to the fun part when Scott Wapner becomes part of the story. So there I am, minding my own business with CNBC on in the background. I'm looking at the crawl. All of a sudden, you say, you book Ackman.
I booked Ackman.
What year is that? And what's the time horizon there? So he goes short 2012.
I booked Ackman on January 24th of 2013, the night before the infamous Brawl, because I had been walking to my desk in the newsroom, and I didn't know Bill and I didn't know Carl. And to my recollection, we had never met prior. But I saw Icahn on TV on another network, really lambasting Ackman. And I stood there and I was watching this and I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. I was sort of mesmerized by what I was seeing. And I literally went back to my desk and I cold emailed Ackman. I asked him if he wanted to respond to what Icahn had been saying. And Icahn was pretty harsh. You don't generally hear that kind of stuff on TV. Yeah, and it felt
very personal, right?
It was. There's no secret. I don't like this Ackman guy. Yeah. And everybody is like, oh my God, where is this going? So people started to suspect that Carl had an Herbalife position at that time, but no one knew, and Carl wouldn't talk about it during that interview on the other network. And then I had a dinner that evening in Midtown Manhattan, and I was sitting in the bar ahead of dinner waiting for my guests to arrive. And I got an email from Ackman saying that he was going to have a statement and that he would give it to me first. So I'm thinking, okay, this is great. I'll get it first. We'll put it out. The CNBC will put it out first, and I'll have a little thing. He sends me the thing, and I ended up calling him and saying, do you just want to come on my show tomorrow and talk about it? And he said, sure. So I said, well, okay. I call the people back at work. I'm like, all right, we got a little something tomorrow at noon. That'll be fun. And not 2 minutes later, he called me back and he said, I'm not going to come on.
Nah.
Yeah, this whole thing's a sideshow. I'll come on your show when I have something substantive. And, obviously I was disappointed. I tried to play Mr. Cool and I said, okay, whatever. I go back and I sit down with my guest at the dinner table. And, 5 minutes later, my phone rings again. And I excuse myself. I go out to the lobby of the hotel and it's Ackman again. And he says, you know what? F it. I'll do it. A few other expletives after that. And he's like, Carl wronged me. I'll say that for the purposes of this program.
Yes, thank you.
I'll do it. So I was like, okay, this is great. So I didn't know that another producer who knew Icahn very well told Carl that Bill was going to come on and that he should watch it at that moment, and that if he wanted to, he should call in. And I'm sitting there interviewing Ackman, and we're approaching a break, maybe quarter past the hour, and they tell me that Icahn wants to call in, or that he's called in. I don't remember exactly, and that he wants to talk to Ackman on the air. So I say to Bill, Bill, I understand that Carl Icahn is called in, and he wants to talk to you. I'll give you a couple of choices. We can either, say goodbye, or we can take a quick break and come back and you can have this conversation. And I think he said something to the effect of, no, I think we've wasted enough of your viewers' time. But then said, he sort of caught himself and thought about it and then said, no, you know what? Let's do it, or something to that effect. So we literally took a break and we came back, and for the next almost half hour straight with no commercial breaks, these guys are insulting each other on live television with the traders on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange on a delay, about a 2-second delay, oohing and eyeing. And, I'm just trying to hold the whole thing together. And it was this incredible moment that sort of just unfolded on live TV.
Look at the timing. Ackman did it with a week to go or a month to go before he had to show in his results. His results were bad for 2012, and this got his results up double, so he could get fees for himself. And then he talks about charity. That's complete bull. He's not giving it to charity. His limited partners aren't going to give it to charity, as assuming they don't need charity themselves. Now, that's
Carl,
what I'll say about Ackman, okay?
Let me remind you that we are on live television. So that was an interesting choice of words. But let me do this. I mean,
Can I just say a couple things and we'll move on? All right, the last thing, just to clear the record.
It was like a high-stakes cat fight. And you watching it, but you gave them enough room to both speak enough where you could feel the animus between these two guys. And I think that is always what drew me into the story, is that, like, these guys really don't like each other. Forgetting about the fact they got billions of dollars that are being wagered, because to me that was actually less interesting in many ways. It's that the seed of this was so personal and that each felt like the other had wronged him.
I think you could genuinely feel the bubble under the surface for the prior decade erupt like a volcano on live television. And it got nasty.
Yeah.
It got nasty. The kind of things you don't hear on live TV. At one point, Icahn was mad at me because he had told the producer who booked him that he didn't want to talk about Herbalife, that he was going to talk that he was going to talk about what he wanted to talk about. But of course, I had no idea, and I wanted to get to the truth.
Right.
So I kept asking him, "Do you have a position in Herbalife?" That's what everybody wants to know about. And he starts yelling at me, saying that I bullied him.
That is rage coming from him.
So, the whole thing ends, and I was shell-shocked. I couldn't put into perspective really what had just happened. But of course, my phone's blowing up and the emails and texts are coming through. And I got an email from a colleague who said, "This will live on." And by God, he was right. It just took me a while to fully grasp what had just happened.
This is Better Off with Jill Schlesinger.
We'll get back to our interview with Scott Wapner in just a second. But so interesting that part of this book, When the Wolves Bite, surrounds our problems as investors, even mega investors, that we fall prey to all the time. Our emotions often get in the way. And if you find yourself falling prey to that particular human trap, maybe it's time for you to get some help. Betterment is the largest online financial advisor, and its service is designed to help you build wealth, plan for retirement, and achieve your financial goals. In other words, Betterment's mission is to help customers make the most of their money. And one of the ways that they can do that is that they can take complex investing strategies and use technology to make them more efficient. And they can also help relieve you of being a human being. Because when you use Betterment, you're not buying and selling and moving your money around and making yourself crazy based on your feelings. And here's some more good news. As a fiduciary, Betterment makes recommendations in the client's best interest. So if you want to get out of that endless emotional loop, sign up today and get 1 year managed free at Betterment. Visit betterment.com/betteroff. That's betterment.com/betteroff. And now back to our interview with CNBC's Scott Wapner. In retrospect, at that moment, after that interview, did you have a sense of which one of these two guys would ultimately prevail?
I really didn't, because, as powerful and tough as Carl Icahn can be, you still didn't know what the government was going to do. And Carl may have made all of the right counter arguments and have been as tough as they come, but the government could still act and shut Herbalife down or do anything, declare it a pyramid scheme, and then Bill could be right.
And then over the next couple of years, Ackman goes and lobbies the government and starts to really use influence to try to force some sort of regulatory action.
So Ackman had always declared that he would go to the ends of the earth to win this.
Which, by the way, is never a good investment strategy.
Right. And he did get maybe overly emotional, to your point, where it is a destructive trait to have as an investor. But he declared he was going to go to the ends of the earth, and he sure as hell tried. He went down to Washington and he lobbied regulators, and he sent emails to the head of the FTC, Edith Ramirez, which, when you all read the book, you'll see the lengths to which he truly went to try and press his case. So you never knew what was really going to happen, if he would be that persuasive. But I always did think, in the back of my mind, I wondered whether the government would truly act in the name of a billionaire investor in New York.
But he invoked the fact that there was a predatory element of this. So that may have gotten the attention, right?
Sure, and I'm sure to some degree it did, because the FTC did launch an investigation. You never really knew whether they were going to act knowing that a billionaire in New York, and a loud one, was going to profit from it. Now, he was going to give the profits to charity, but his investors were still going to make money by virtue of the fund's performance doing well. So it was a difficult thing to gauge, even whether you thought Ackman got the best of Icahn that day or Icahn got the best of Ackman. What we didn't know was that it was going to play out over a number of years.
Let's play that out. So finish the story, and then I want to get back to you.
They have this brawl, and there are other events throughout the way. Ackman continues to press his case. He has other presentations. He says he's going to have a death blow on Herbalife, this big presentation about the China aspect of the business. He came on my show and he hyped it up. And if ever something was overhyped in the history of overhyping, this was it. Because he promised a death blow, his words, and at the end of his presentation, Herbalife shares actually went up 25%. 25%. So if that's not the ultimate sort of smack in the face, I don't know what is. And that became a thing for a while where I don't even think people necessarily listened to the argument that he was making. It became more of trying to, the Schadenfreude thing of taking joy in the misery of watching this guy's investment go up in smoke. Mm-hmm. And, so it played out for a while. There were lulls and there would be an event. And then ultimately, within the last, say, 18 months, Bill and Carl sort of came together in what seemed to be the ending of the story when Bill came on TV and said that Icahn had been trying to sell his position. And, of course, Icahn being Icahn and Bill being Bill goes on TV and says this, and Icahn's incredulous, sort of watching it from the periphery, and said, who the hell is this guy to go on TV and tell the world what I'm thinking or what I'm doing? So not only was Icahn not selling at that moment, he may have been thinking about it, and he may have been having other people take a look at the position to try and move it. Icahn ended up buying more after Bill went on TV.
This is called stepping on the throat of your adversary.
And it literally was this repeated thing over a course of 5 years until finally Icahn kept buying more and kept buying more and kept buying more. And Bill, within the last many months, finally got all but out.
How much did he lose overall? Do you have a guesstimate there?
I don't have the exact number. He probably lost close to what he put in. But I can't be for certain because the position was restructured a number of different times to use options to mitigate some of the risk and some of the loss. He went into it in a straight stock position. But, when the writing was on the wall at one point, he converted some of it and then he did it again. So it's hard to truly know. But Icahn has made more than $1.2 billion.
Okay, two billionaires, who cares, right? Like one has a little bit fewer billion that maybe he had. But what is the lasting lesson that comes out of this brawl for each of them? What do you think? Do you think either of them learned something or both of them? What do you think?
So I think that Bill will never go public with a short position ever again. I'm also fairly confident that he will never short anything again. Now, he may, and I could be completely wrong, but there's no way he's getting up on a stage ever again and saying that he's short XYZ company and it's going to zero. What I also try and do in the book, and I hope readers come out with their own view of what separates these two, not in a way that one is better than the other or that, but just the different parts of their psyche that guide them as great investors. And to be fair, the last few years have been unkind to Bill Ackman, but before that, he had some really spectacular wins, including, a trade that will go down arguably as the greatest hedge fund trade ever made. So it's not like, he's a dummy. It's just they have different personal characteristics about them. Bill is more emotional. He's more emotionally invested in the positions that he makes. Whereas, Carl is more, hey, you win some, you lose some. If you lose, you take the bait off the hook and you go into another pond. Mm-hmm. And he's been able to do that successfully. He's had his ups and downs, obviously, but he hasn't had these spectacular wins or losses like Bill has. And I just wonder if that, underscores in some way the difference between the two men.
Would activist investors, if they only stuck to creating a position without any leverage, without borrowed money, would that be perhaps a cleaner way to essentially change this from a mathematical formula that mostly enriches shareholders to one that could help the company overall? Or would it not matter?
I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters. I mean, I think that whether there's no leverage or what, I don't think it makes a difference to how these investors view what they think is right for the company. If there's something that has changed, though, towards activism over the last few years, I think it's companies are more emboldened than ever to fight back. I truly believe that. Now, I don't know whether the Herbalife case specifically has led to that. I think companies are feeling better about themselves to push back and say, maybe you all don't have the best answers, that let us, the CEO, the board, run the company the way we see fit, that we don't necessarily need your outside interference, which may last for a handful of years. It may be less, but the impact on our firms will be forever.
So, Scott, you are a financial journalist. You've been doing this for a few years, and people see you all the time on CNBC. What is something that would surprise people, like a deeply held view that you have that people may misconstrue about the business, that you really feel to your core is like, this would surprise people to know that I think, what is that thing?
That's a hard question to answer. I've gotten to know a lot of these activist investors, and they're sort of the core of my source book, if you will. I think they do hold deeper views about what they do than some people give them credit for. I don't think, by and large, they view what they do as fly-by-night short timers or short termers, and they do get a lot of criticism. I think it's easy to be a critic of activist investors, and admittedly, they invite it, some themselves, and don't always get it right. But I do speak regularly, not only to the subjects of this book, but the others as well. And at least from the conversations that I have, these are people who know deeply about the businesses that they're going into. I think they're more genuinely interested in the well-being of the company. I don't know about for the next 20 years, but I do think that they're more invested, not just financially, than people give them credit for.
Last two questions. If you weren't in your dream job at CNBC, you would be?
I would be a chef at an Italian restaurant somewhere.
I'm going to add one question. I said two questions. I'm going to make it three questions.
Okay.
Your favorite Italian restaurant in New York City?
Oh, boy.
Don't piss anyone off now. Don't be thinking about where you're getting your reservation next, mister.
or not anymore.
Exactly.
I have several.
Oh, don't punt. Give me come on.
My favorite Italian restaurant in the city. Man, I'll
let you do three. How about that?
Okay. All right. Awesome.
Off the hook.
I love Elio's.
Mm-hmm.
I like Premola.
Really? Old school, dude. That's my mother's favorite restaurant.
Carbone. I love old school Italian places.
Like the best thing that ever happened to the Upper West Side is those guys open Parm.
Il Tonello. I like old school.
Okay.
But I like authentic.
Authentic.
I don't like I don't want the bowl. I don't want the bowl full of red sauce. I want authentic but done well. But I love the old school vibe.
Okay. Last question. Your best decision.
Better be able to get a table there now. It's impossible.
Exactly. Scott, what do you think is a good restaurant for everyone to try? We started the interview with you, Scott Wapner, that's you, with your big question, which was best career or financial decision. What was your worst?
My worst. I mean, it was hard to stay sane during the financial crisis, I'll tell you that. Looking at your own personal financial situation, it was hard to stay sane.
Did you sell?
I sold a little bit.
Fraidy cat.
I know. It was a crazy time. I didn't know the world was going to end.
No, you didn't know it was not going to end.
No, I didn't know if it was going to end.
Yeah, right.
I think a lot of us were in that boat.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, I had some good advice at the time, but there were some tense moments. I wish I wasn't as sort of emotional about it personally, but it was difficult when you're covering it professionally and you're hearing so much and talking to so many different people. It was, an earthquake times a million, and who knew what was going to happen? So I think I've tried to since then let the people who know what they're doing with the money. I'm not a financial advisor. I talk about the markets. I try and make it that people listening or watching us get great advice, but I'm not controlling anybody's money.
Scott Wapner, the book is called When the Wolves Bite: 2 Billionaires, 1 Company, and an Epic Wall Street Battle. Scott, thank you so much.
Jill, thank you.
Thanks so much to Scott Wapner. Go check out his book, When the Wolves Bite. Don't forget, we drop new episodes of Better Off every Tuesday and Thursday. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts: Apple, Google Play, Stitcher, or just go to JillOnMoney.com. Our music is composed by Joel Goodman. Mark Talercio is our executive producer. We're distributed by Cadence 13, and we're sponsored by Betterment. See you next week.